Hello, everyone, and welcome to Encouraging Self-Expression by Showcasing Student Success. I'm Fallon Jackson, and today we will be discussing how to implement digital portfolios into your program. So as we all get settled in, first of all, welcome. In the chat, there's a couple things that I want you to put. First thing, I want you to put what school you teach at. Make sure that you add in what state you're in so we can see all the different states that have joined us today. Also put in what CTE area you're in. And then last but most definitely not least, tell me what you hope to gain from this session. So as y'all are putting that in there, I'll go first. So like I said, my name is Fallon Jackson. I'm an agricultural educator in Lexington, Kentucky. I currently teach at Locust Trace Agri-Science Center, and my main focus is on equine studies. And so I teach students about horses, and we learn everything there is from the business aspect to it to the hands-on skills. So as we're going through this, I'm mostly going to be focusing on hands-on skills and the equine program, but I know that not all of us are ag teachers. And so as we go along, if you have an idea of how this might benefit a different CTE area or maybe your program specifically, throw it in the chat so that way we can get different ideas and think about how we can do things different than maybe I'm presenting it. So quick overview of all the things that we're going to cover today. First is we're going to discuss the benefits of digital portfolios. My end goal is to convince you why this is important and why you should do it for your program. We're also going to talk about considering different websites and applications that our students can actually use to create digital portfolios. And then we're going to explore implementation. So how do we actually make digital portfolios? How do we get our students to implement this project? I'm going to show you a few examples on two different platforms, and then we're going to finish up with a live question and answer at the end. So I hope you'll stick around for that. So benefits, there's a ton of them. I've listed just a couple of them, but as we go through, if you think of maybe a different benefit that I haven't put on here, again, throw it in the chat. I want to get as many different ideas as possible because there might be something that you've thought of that has totally escaped my mind. So the first, and I think most important, is student choice. I personally love student choice. We often hear from administrators and people throughout the state that student choice is important, and it is. But sometimes it's a little bit easier said than done. On some projects or some curriculum, student choice just is real hard to have implemented. And so in this project, the students have choices for everything. And so it's really easy to justify to your administrators why you're doing this project. And I'm going to tell you a few other reasons why. Next, it's customizable, which goes into student choice, but I put them separately because in the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you some different examples from my students. And you're going to see how even though students might have some of the same identifiers such as gender, age, race, they're going to create totally different projects. And I think that's really cool. It also can be used as a capstone project. So my school, we're talking about starting this freshman year, and then by the time students get to their senior year, they use it as a capstone project. Maybe you're thinking, gosh, I don't know if I can commit to that. And that's fine. I did it this past year in just one class and it worked out great. But if you're thinking big, long-term, capstone project is definitely doable. It also is marketable. So not only does it make your program more marketable, because these are really awesome to send to your administrators or people in your district and say, hey, look at all the cool stuff my kids are doing. It makes your students more marketable, and it also makes your program, like I said, marketable. And if you're anything like me and where I'm at, I constantly worry about student enrollment and making sure that my program is kind of a no-brainer to keep. And so this is an easy way to, on the sly, say, hey, look at all the awesome stuff we're doing, and kind of humble brag on yourself and on your students. It's wonderful for collaboration. And so while I do know a lot about technology, I know that I'm not an expert. And so when I had this idea, I went to my librarian and I said, I have this idea. How do we make it work? And so I was able to collaborate with her. But I can also see you, like I'm an ag teacher. And so I could also see collaborating with maybe my marketing teacher, my business teacher, or maybe an IT teacher. And so the limit does not exist on how much you can collaborate, not only within your school, but also within your district and your state. And this is not an exhaustive list. There might be benefits for your program that may not work for my program, but just know there are tons of benefits to implementing this project. So, couple tools to create. My favorite and what I'm going to be focusing on the most today is Google Sites. Google Sites, I think, is probably the most foolproof one of this list that I'm going to go through. It's what my students have used, and I just think generally it's the most user friendly. Google has gone through, they made short little videos talking to you about how to add content, pages, how you customize the design. It also goes through and gives you a step-by-step guide. And so for me, I wanted, when I put this on my, we use Canvas for our learning module, but I know other places use Google Classroom or maybe something different. When I put all this on Canvas, I wanted it to be a little bit more step by step. So instead of putting up this big PDF where if you look at it, 5 pages, some students might get overwhelmed. I broke it down into step by step and kind of made those steps to where once you complete the first step, then you go on to the second step. So that way students wouldn't get overwhelmed. But again, you got to figure out what's right for you and your program. Bulb is another one that I have a little bit of familiarity with. They do have a partnership with ICEV, which I think is really cool because if you're using ICEV already, it kind of makes sense to go ahead and partner with a company that's working with ICEV. And so again, they've got different examples. It talks to you, I mean, they have them all the way down from elementary students to high school students. And so pretty cool. Again, they've got different resources. And so you have to figure out at the end of the day what's best for you and your students. I explored Bulb. One of their consultants sat down with myself and my librarian, and they walked us through everything. But at the end of the day, Bulb was a little too customizable, and I knew that my students would get kind of lost in the details and all the decisions that they had to make. And so for me, where Google Sites had a lot more templates, and the templates you couldn't kind of stray for them, worked for me in my program. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to figure out what works for you because it may not be the same as what works for me. And then there's WordPress, Squarespace, and Weebly. I don't know that much about them, but I have heard of other people using them. For me, the main allure of Google Sites was that it was free. My school already uses Google. My students are pretty familiar with how Google works. And so that's one of the main reasons why I chose to use Google Sites versus one of these other ones. And my librarian was like, if you do Google Sites, I'll help you. And so I was like, deal, say less. So for implementation, I want us to think in the chat, when you implement this, what do you hope to gain? Are you hoping that it will increase enrollment in your program? Are you hoping that maybe it'll just make you look good? Are you hoping that it will showcase students and how they're successful? Have you realized at this point you're in the wrong session, but you're too ashamed to hit that leave meeting button and hear that little ding? Tell me in the chat, what do you hope to gain from implementing this project? The main thing that I had kind of an end goal was I wanted to be able to see all the awesome things that my students do. And like I said, working with horses is very hands-on, it's very skill oriented. And so I wanted to be able to have a place where students could put all of those skills and all those achievements on one place, and then in the future be able to send it to a future employer, or maybe just send it to their parents or whoever they live with at home and say, look at all the things that I'm learning in school. So, I mean, the limit does not exist on why you should implement digital portfolios, but I want to hear from you all what you all think. So as you all are putting those in there, I'm going to tell you some of the tabs, and it'll make sense in just a minute when I show you a picture. But some of the tabs that I had my students actually use for on their homepage, I had them make it about them. So it's a quick about me. Who are they? What do they like? Just a quick introduction. Some students chose to put a picture and write out a little about them blurb. Other students decided to actually make an about me video. So again, student choice, customizable. I love it. They also put a passion page. So sometimes I get students that are very one-dimensional, and the only thing that they're into is horses. And I have tried to kind of expand that and talk about, okay, so the only thing you do all day, every day is horses. And they're like, well, no, I do other stuff. Okay, well, I want you to put that stuff on there because it's really important to me that my students are well-rounded. And also, my favorite thing about the passion page is I learned stuff about my students that I never even thought to ask. So I had a lot of students that were really into anime, so it was really fun to talk to them about what their favorite shows were. And some of them I'd already seen, and some of them I went and watched. And it was a cool way to connect, even though 3/4 of the year we were pretty virtual, or we were totally virtual. And so the passion page was really fun for me to be able to learn more about my students. The big one for me, like I said earlier, was equine skills. Like I said just a minute ago, we were virtual for 3/4 of the year. So the equine skills, they had to do a little bit more writing than I would have liked. But next year, instead of a student saying, I can bandage a leg, I'm going to actually have them video them bandaging a horse's leg. So that way I can see that skill and kind of be able to grade that way. But then I also, whenever they go to send these to a future employer or internship site, it'll serve as a soft interview. And so instead of them being able to put on a resume, I can bandage a leg, that employer can actually go to their equine skills page, find the skill that they're looking for, watch the video, and say, okay, I can physically see that the student knows how to bandage a leg. And so that's not something that they have to worry about teaching that student. I also wanted to highlight their achievements. I am a pretty competitive person, and a lot of my students are as well. And so I wanted to highlight all of the things that they have achieved. Now, for some of my students, we struggled with this a little bit because they pretty much went to school and either went to work or didn't have any extracurriculars. So for you and your program, this may not work, or even student to student, this might not work. But for me, it kind of served as a reminder that just like equine and horses can't be the only thing in your life, school and work can't be the only things in your life. And a lot of employers and colleges and universities are wanting to see a little bit more well-rounded individuals. Or if you go into a trade, because we know not all of our students are going to go to college, a trade wants to know that work isn't the only thing that you do. They want a well-rounded individual. I also had students put up a learner profile. So it talked about ways they learn best and ways that they struggle with learning. Again, my goal was whenever they go to an internship site or to an employer, that employer is going to know, okay, instead of me verbally telling the student what to do, I'm going to actually demonstrate for them. And they're going to know that that is going to be leaps and bounds better than them just saying, okay, I want you to do this, this, and this. Maybe they might need to write down the skills on a board so that way that student can check it off. And so it's also helped me learn what my students, how they learn best, and what I needed to do to change my instruction to be able to make sure that I was meeting all my student needs. Then last but not least, resume. I debated going back and forth on this one, whether to put it on there or not. In the end, I went ahead and put it up there just because we were virtual and there weren't a whole lot of equine skill videos on there. But I could also talk myself out of putting the resume on there. So you got to figure out what works for you and your students. On the resume, I will tell you, I did have my students, if they were going to go ahead and send this out to people, any of those identifiable markers like phone number, address that they didn't want somebody to have access to, I went ahead and had them take it off of it, which also helped reinforce being good digital citizens, because this link could get sent to other people and you never know who's going to get a hold of it. So we wanted to make sure that everything on there was only stuff that they would want people to have. So here is my digital portfolio in preparation for this project. I went ahead and made one because I didn't want to get to a point where a student says, this issue is happening and I don't know how to do it, because I didn't want to be like, well, I don't know, go Google it. So I went ahead and made one. And so when we talk about the tabs, I'm talking about these things right here. So obviously nobody cares how I learn because I'm an adult. So I focus on things like professional development, courses taught, involvement in the community, that sort of stuff. But this was a nice way to be able to show students how I did my digital portfolio and give them a few ideas. And then we also shared a lot in class with students showing and sharing their screen on their projects, because a lot of students were like, "Oh, I love that idea. Do you mind if I use it?" And so it was a cool way to be able to brag on each other. So these are a couple student examples. So this top one is a junior in the program. And so she had a lot of equine experience before she came to Locust Trace. And so she has a lot more depth for hers than students who maybe came into the program and had no equine experience. But as you can see up here are all of her different tabs. But then in her equine skills, she went ahead and broke it down into different subcategories. So if you click on each of these, if you were looking at her portfolio, it would expand and it would talk to you about all the general equine skills she has. She's even done some education about horses, and so she put that on there as well. And so this was the best portfolio I had by far. And I even stole some of her ideas because I really like the collapsible text. And I think it was an easy way to not be overwhelmed with just a bunch of writing. Down here was a senior that recently graduated who is working on one of the local farms around here. And so she broke hers down into hands-on skills and then business skills, because she was also not only was she working on the farm getting the hands-on skills, but she also was taking a class doing the business skills side of things. So even though they're both semi-young females, you can tell they have very different styles, which again goes back to the student choice and customizable, because I think it's really cool to see how different personalities come through this project. So you're like, okay, great. We've kind of gone over a few things. I need some concrete examples that I can look at. So the first one is a Google Sites example. This is the one that my librarian found. And so we showed it to students because, I mean, they looked at mine, they were like, okay, great, you're old, we don't care about you. But Hannah is a little bit closer to their age. And so they connected with us a little bit better. So again, Hannah has her tabs up here on the top. But within each of her tabs, she also can have sub pages. And so this is a physics portfolio, as we see up here. And I had my students again on the homepage do a quick about them. So she's got a photo. As we went through these, we also looked at some ones that are not as great as Hannah's. And it went through and we talked about visualizing what you wanted to put on there. We also looked at the way things looked. We had one student who had a selfie and his dad was in the background. And that was the portfolio that he was sending out to people. So we talked about professionalism and what image we wanted to portray to the people we were sending this to. So we went through and did some critiques. So my librarian and I got the learner profile idea from Hannah's digital portfolio. We adapted ours a little bit, again, to fit our students in our program. But it was pretty cool to be able to go through and read about what made Hannah Hannah. The passion page for Hannah, she put up videos of them, of what made or what her passions were. For my students, I encouraged them to really put as many personal pictures as they could, and it didn't have to be of their faces. I had a lot of students who were into art and drawing or photography, and so they put up stuff that they had created on there. And then I did have some students like Hannah that they put YouTube videos up there to talk about what they were passionate about. But I wanted them to make it as personalized as they could. And so I really encouraged them to make it personalized. So then throughout here, Hannah's got some different stuff on there about physics, which is a little over my head. But for her teacher, I'm sure that they knew everything that she was talking about. And so this is another way to kind of quickly know if your students have it or if they don't, is by going through here and reading. You can tell if they got it or they don't. Hannah's portfolio is actually on Google Sites. And so if you are looking for some examples, Google Sites, this is one of the ones they had linked. I'm also going to show you a bulb example. When we looked at bulbs page, you might have seen it when I hovered over the high school version. But this is Rains, and as you can see, Bulb has a totally different look than Google Sites does. And so Bulb has pages and they have collections. And so when you think about a collection, think about like a Pinterest board where you're putting all your ideas onto one board. And that board kind of serves as like a heading. That's what your collection is. And then a page is just a standalone page. And so for Rain, she does a lot with graphic design, which I think is really cool because I don't know anything about it. And so through here, she's talked about, she actually created a sneaker for a design contest, which I think is really neat, because I mean, when I look at the shoe, I do get Simpson vibes. And then she also talks about the psychology of color. And you can really tell as you're reading through this that she knows what she's talking about. So as you can see, very different styles on the pages. Hannah's is a little bit more meat and potatoes, a little less fluff because it's a physics thing, versus Rain is working on graphic design. And so hers is a little bit more bubbly and her personality shines through. Um, I'm sure some of the physics portfolios that were turned in were a little bit more fluffy, but some of them might not have been. And so, again, each student that turns it in is going to have a totally different take on what they like. So, I want to thank you for sticking with me to the end, but don't go anywhere just yet. We do have a live Q&A after this. After this, you're going to be automatically awarded points for joining me. And then at the end of the conference, you're going to get a digital certificate that pretty much says you were with me, how many points and how many sessions you attended. And like I said, there's a live Q&A after this, so don't hit that leave button just yet. But before we end, I do want to tell you all that this was a project that was a lot. At times it got overwhelming, but I had a good support base. My librarian was amazing. And so if you have questions or if you're like, I want to do this, but I'm not totally sure how to implement it, send me an email. I'd love to connect with you. Or if you're thinking, well, I mean, this may not work for my program, but I kind of want to make a digital portfolio to kind of brag on my students. If you go to fallonjackson.com, it's my actual digital portfolio. And now it's not going to light the world on fire, but it gives you an example of what another educator in the state does. And I actually looked at different educator pages throughout the world to be able to see what I liked from each and what I didn't. And that's how I got a lot of the ideas for the different pages for my students. And so don't be afraid to kind of step outside of your comfort zone and try something new. So again, stick with us for the live Q&A. I hope to see you there.